Welcome to the Blueprint Podcast, where we throw out the old blueprint so you can become who you were always meant to be. I'm your host, Jason Smith, and if you haven't already, make sure you click the subscribe button and share this podcast with your friends on social media and tag me in it at JBirdFit. Today, I have a very special guest for you, Mark Groves. He's a human connection specialist, speaker, author, coach, podcast host, and founder of Create the Love. Born with an innate curiosity and hunger for truth, Mark's journey of self-discovery and personal liberation has led him to spend the last decade coaching and inspiring millions of people around the world to create the life and love they desire. Through his candid but compassionate, no BS guidance, Mark has helped empower countless individuals, teams, and companies to step into their most authentic, effective, loving selves, transform the way they relate to themselves and others, and create profound changes in their lives and relationships. Mark Groves, welcome to the Blueprint Podcast.
So excited to be here.
Take two. No,
Yeah.
this is awesome.
Yeah.
I got to give a shout out to Sabrina Zohar, who connected us, which awesome podcast. If you guys haven't checked it out yet, be sure to check out the Sabrina Zohar Show, formerly Do the Work podcast, and go show her some love.
Sabrina is incredible. She's so fun.
She is.
She's such a great teacher, and yeah, I just really love her.
What's really great about it is we entered into all of this around the same time. And somehow or another, social media being what it is, it connected us. We collaborated on a few things and we still continue to text back and forth and stuff like that with all the challenges as with social media, which we can get into that right now. Just first question, what made you want to get off the hamster wheel of the meta platforms?
Oh man, I think it was about 3 years ago. Yeah, it was 21. Maybe, yeah, it was 2021. I remember being in a meeting about needing to create more content, and someone needed something else from me, and I just felt like I was at the end of it. I just had no more psychological capacity. And I remember breaking down in the meeting. And I remember thinking, I'm actually afraid of what happens to my mind if I don't stop doing what I'm doing. And I Googled psychotic break or nervous breakdown. And I was grateful that it was neither of those,
Well,
but it
that's
was
good.
definitely right on the edge. And it was terrifying. And that week, I actually let go of 2 marketing people for the first time in 8 years. I took a month off. I had been posting every day up to 3 times a day straight for 8 years. And it was only in the last year and a bit that I'd even repurposed content at that time. And so I came back to social media and I came back with the goal to get off, but my marketing person was like, "Get off social media. That doesn't make sense. Let's just keep doing what we're doing." And intuitively, I should have listened at that time because I was like, "No, I should have doubled down on what my goal was." And I kept I kept doing it. It was working, but it stopped working. Like I stopped getting organic reach. I was growing at 50 to 100,000 followers a month. I was crushing it. My business was flying. And this was all during people spending more time online. There was all the like confounding,
Okay.
perfectly timed factors, but then also COVID was going on. And I used to be in pharma for 14 years and also taught people the science of influence. I launched drugs, I took them off the market, I did lots of things. And when I left that over 10 years ago, I never thought that that experience would come back into my life, like the
Right.
experience I'd had. And so I wasn't outspoken. I was just still curious. I was like, this doesn't make sense that they're promoting this product in this way because I'm reading the studies and there's no study to support that declaration, like it stops transmission. And I would ask those questions out loud. And oh my God, I got shadow banned. I was getting slammed. I went from growing so fast to not growing. And then that led me down this wow, there's so much narrative shaping on here. There's so much propaganda. There's so much. And what I also noticed as a creator was that they were starting to change. Oh, you have to do dancey, pointy videos and you have to use viral music and you have to do all this shit. And you have to pay to reach an audience that you have created content that the person has said, I want this content. And this intermediary, this broker says, nah, maybe not. And maybe you pay now to actually get that. And I get it's a business and it required profit, but what I noticed occurred, and maybe this was when Meta bought Instagram, because that happened on Facebook years ago, where Facebook pages had reach of 100,000 people and or whatever, you had 100,000 likes or followers. And then one day they went from 30, 40% engagement to 2%. And so people's businesses completely collapsed. And so people have seen this occur on Instagram because the people who created Instagram were like, let's create a photo sharing app and maybe it'll become worth a lot of money, but this is the nature of it. The intention was pure. And then when shareholders buy something, the only intention is profit. And so algorithms are shaped to extract as much attention as possible because attention is money. Attention is currency. And what I started to feel in my body was that I was being told you either do this for the algorithm or you don't. And so you become a conduit for extraction. And your creativity and your self expression starts to be shaped by the needs of the platform, not the needs of your expression and the needs of your audience. And Instagram made a very big pivot in 2022-ish 3 that copied TikTok's model, which was content forward. So if I said that I wanted to follow you, I would get your content. But what TikTok did was said, yeah, you could follow them, but we notice what content you're more engaged with. So we're going to feed you more cat videos, even though you say you want to learn more about love. And so Instagram copied that model, and so you saw that people were starting to get a lot of content, not from their followers, but suggested videos. And and if you watch videos, you can just forever scroll. You never hit an end.
Right.
So all that to say, I just felt, oh my God, these dynamics that I'm in with Instagram and Facebook, I feel powerless in this relationship. And so I started journaling on it. Why do I feel powerless? And I was like, "Oh, because if I say the wrong thing, they can take everything. If I don't do what they ask me to, I lose everything. If I don't dance to the algorithm, it's like the algorithm is a mystery. You never know how it works. And the moment you think it changes, it's much like being in an abusive relationship dynamic.
Yes.
They give you a bit of virality, so you get the love bombing and you get the affirmation, and then they take it away. So you're still like, what do I need to do? I need to make more, and nothing is ever enough. And I was recently speaking to Stephen Porges, who's the founder of polyvagal theory about the nervous system. And he was saying, yeah, it's really fascinating because if you look at it, you're constantly like, if you and I are in a conversation or we're in a group of people and the conversation ends and we go our separate ways, we're no longer at social risk because we're not engaged in a group. We're not engaged in a dialogue. So, me as Mark Groves, there's no social, I'm not available for criticism when I'm not amongst a group. And so, like, for a human, that's a very big, important thing is that we're always like monitoring, am I safe in my environment? Am I safe in this group? Am I safe to self-express? And what happens is that now you have this entity, this version of you that lives in a social media profile that is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That like Mark Groves, the idea of me or my self-expression or my language or my
The
opinion,
caricature. Yeah.
the thoughts, feelings, opinions that have been documented, that are living 24 hours a day available, can always be criticized, not just by people I know, but by people I don't know. And the other thing that's really fascinating from a nervous system relational perspective is that if I'm feeling taken advantage of by you, I can say to you, hey, you know what? I'm not feeling great about this dynamic. And here's the things that are impacting me. And here's what I need to change in our relationship. But 24 hours a day, not only are you being evaluated by random strangers, you're also being evaluated by a non human entity, an algorithm. And you don't even know how you're being evaluated. And it's not relational. These platforms do not have customer service. So if in our relationship I say I'm not feeling good, we can change things. But in this model, there is no feedback mechanism. And that actually is huge. So that's why I was like, I know that was a very long answer,
No, I
but
love it.
that's the context to why I was like, I can't I can't in this way participate in this relationship Is there a way to do it? I don't know. I'm living that question because I'm away from it now and I feel fucking awesome. So I'm like, is there a way? Because I've had people run my social media, but I'm like, is that hiring someone to date an abusive person for you? So I'm really like, maybe it's about doing paid ads and that kind of thing. Cause then at least there's a, it's on your terms for the most part, as
Yeah.
where content just seems so ubiquitous now too. There's a million people saying a million things.
Yeah, I haven't been doing it as long as you have, and I think it's interesting because I've been doing it for 2 years now, and prior to that, I had taken a break off my personal social media, deleted everything, got away from it, felt fantastic, and then had this calling to start sharing my story and how I got to where I am today, and just the circumstances surrounding all of that. It was relatable and people liked it. There was steady growth, but it wasn't quick. Then about a year into it, all of a sudden things start blowing up and expanding, and Facebook grew to 130 some thousand. And that was great for a while. Instagram, a little more difficult, hit all the milestones. I think I'm at like 68,000 right now, but and the algorithm has changed even over the past 6 months where I'm just basically doing what I'm doing for TikTok and it's working on Instagram. So I'm just continuing to do that. And it's been really great.
Yeah.
People love the take a walk with me videos. And you're right, it opens you up to there's a lot of criticism, but what I've noticed more of is I'm in that season of people are loving the content. So they're
That's
actually like,
great.
yeah, they're filling you up saying, "This really resonates with me. This is amazing. This is so awesome." But you're right in that it's like an abusive relationship because with Facebook, all of a sudden, not 6 months, but probably 3 months ago, everything stopped. And then I couldn't
Mhm.
figure it out. And I'm getting all these bot comments and all this other stuff and go see cyber so and so to help you hack into your ex's
Yeah.
phone and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And you're sitting there and
I
like,
get it too.
what is this? And so I do a really good job. I spend a lot more time than I should deleting out those comments because one, I don't want people getting scammed. And two, I don't like the energy of it sitting there on my social media as people are coming to
Mhm.
watch a video where I'm giving something that's hopefully beneficial and helpful to someone. And they're trying to connect with that. And then they go into the comment section and they're hit with something negative and scammy. And then that's a representation of what I'm putting out there, unfortunately. So then everything stops. So I had a reach of 1.7 million at one point on Facebook, and that was steady for months. And then it just completely dropped off. I think my reach now is like 68,000.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, see,
You know?
that's a massive drop. Think about
Yeah.
which I've experienced that too. It's I used to get 30, 40,000 views for my stories on Instagram, and now it's if I was to post today, it would be anywhere from 2,000 to maybe 20,000, maybe, but I'd say on average 5,000, which that's a huge difference.
Yeah.
Massive difference when you put something out into the world and it's seen by and I think the mind fuckery of it is that you have people who desire to see it. My content didn't change. My content was the same, where I would get 3, 4, 500,000 impressions on a post, 40, 50, 60,000 likes, and then I would put out similar quality content. It would get 5,000 likes, 80,000. So the percentage engagement was I know how to monitor those metrics. I would have a really high performing early post and it would just never get anywhere. And so I was just like, you know what? This is just such fuckery. I just don't want to play it. But I can understand that for someone growing a brand or doing that, I certainly don't think what I'm saying needs to be applicable to everyone. And there was an early time when it did feel expansive. It did feel
Yeah.
good. It felt fun. It felt all those things. Maybe I just got a bit jaded. It's like
No,
when the fax machine came out and people got upset. It's like, man.
that's true. No, I think there's a season for everything. And I will say, when I saw your video saying that you were pulling away from Meta, I was like, because I was very much like still in that process of I'm trying to grow, I'm trying to expand. And if this
Yeah.
guy's who's been doing this forever is coming off the platform, what exactly is that saying? I'm growing. Things are going well for me at this time. There's Chloe. I
Yeah.
don't know if you
Yeah.
can hear that, but I can.
I can.
Uh,
It's great though.
yeah. And so you're growing and you think things are going well, and then I see you pull away from there, and I'm like, what does that mean for me in terms of growing my own brand and doing what I'm doing? And so I scaled back for a minute and just watched you and I were originally scheduled for July, and I'm glad it didn't
Yeah.
happen in July. And then obviously we tried the other day and the universe said no. And so today we're having this conversation. I'm glad that we are because I dove into a few other things that you have going on. So if we can switch gears for a second, you had interviewed Francis Weller a couple different times. And
Yeah.
I don't know if you know this, but I have a men's group called the Antares Society.
No, I
And
didn't know that.
we
That's
just
cool.
started earlier this year. It's a 12-week program. We run through it. We focus on building a more secure attachment style. I think more and more men are starting to relate to an anxious attachment, and we can put a pin on that and come
Mm,
back to it.
mm.
But these men's groups are so important. I didn't realize that not only did you have one, but you built one together with another group of people. I was hoping you could share more about that experience and how it came to be.
When my now wife and I, when we broke up, when we were dating, after we broke up, it was an amicable, respectable departure. She had suggested that I listen to Francis Weller's program, Alchemy of Initiation, which when I started listening to it, I was like, holy shit, this is everything I need. And I was just realizing that I needed to talk to other people about it because my mind was being shattered by how profound it was. And so I asked a couple buddies if they wanted to do it with me. And it was during COVID. And they joined. They were like, yeah, that sounds great. So we had, I think, a group of maybe 8 guys. And I didn't know it was going to be the birth of a men's group, but it was. We every week would meet and discuss the section that we were listening to. And that's how it started. I've been part of men's groups and men's retreats and that kind of stuff before as an attendee and also running, but I'd never been part of a repeated men's group. And I think we really I needed to do a lot of healing with men. Was more focused on my healing with women prior too, because I was in romantic relationship with women and I wanted to understand that. But I also had a lot of relational trauma with men. Like I was attacked by a gang when I was in grade 11 and got 44 stitches in my head, broke my hand. So I didn't really trust men. And so I didn't trust what men were capable of. And I think what was interesting about that is I also was afraid of what I was capable of because if they were capable of that. And so I didn't have access to clean anger. I didn't have access to anger, really. And so I think like that correlation to anxious attachment is interesting because I grew up in the 80s and 90s. And the message about men then was that men are toxic and pieces of shit and rapists and murderers. And I used to think that was getting better, but I would actually say that it's probably worse now, the messaging that young men get. And when there's an innate belief in society that there's something wrong with you, and there's not an exploration of the trauma or the lack of attunement or attention or emotionality that men get, then you hear someone like Andrew Tate say, "Fuck it all. Look at me. I make lots of money and I bang bitches." And I'm not saying any of that language is okay, but I'm saying that's the energy he gives out. If you're a 15-year-old guy and the rest of the news is telling you you're destined to be a piece of shit, someone like Andrew Tate is pretty attractive. And so that's why we really need integrated models of initiated men who are standing in ferocity in their emotionality and standing up against the language that is used about men, which years ago I would think, man, I would read all these memes on Instagram that would say, oh, if you can't find a man who does this, go just find another one. Or for every man who I remember reading, I was collecting memes of just like how the internet spoke about men. I was like, man, if you switch this and made it about women, you would be dead.
Yeah.
And so you just saw, again, this is not negating the very real level of accountability that is required from it. Not negating that. The very real level of healing that's required for men with women and all the pain and suffering that has been caused. And the solution is not shame. The solution is I heard James Cameron say that we needed to get rid of testosterone because it was the reason for life's greatest ills. And I'm like, we're blaming a hormone. We're not blaming unintegrated trauma. And so For me, I think healing with men has been profound because I've found, I think much like Alison Armstrong talks about, if you haven't heard of her work, she's incredible. And she has a book, she has a lot of programs, but one called The Amazing Development of Men. She has another one on, I think it's called The Queen's Code. She has The Difference Between Men and Women. She's great. And she said that the birth of her work was that she was going to start to study men because she wanted to understand them. And she said, I figured it would take me a couple weeks because they're so simple. And then I'd be done and I'd have resolved everything. And in the recording where she says that, she says, "And it's been 20 years, and I just find that I keep falling more and more in love with who men are." And I was like, "Yeah, like, that's what I've experienced is I know so many good men, and they're all counter to the narrative." And, yeah, so I think the anxious attachment really comes because avoidance more of the way that men went, because avoidance, if you don't have access to emotionality, become a shell, protect up. If you're going to war and doing all that kind of stuff, you can't have emotionality. It's not safe to be crying in a battlefield. It's not safe to and if it's not safe to come home and share all your losses, then what do? You become an island. And the rhetoric that we've been taught about our emotionality just reinforces that. Don't be a pussy, don't all that kind of stuff. Man up. And then you have the very real data that shows that when people are handed a baby and they think it's a boy or a girl, they treat it differently immediately.
I love that you wrote Liberated Love through the lens of codependency because I think our generation, Gen X into millennials, experienced a lot of that with
Mhm.
substance abuse in the background. Not that's the only way that we get to codependency, but there's certainly an element of that. I was hoping that you could lead us a little bit more into the writing of Liberated Love and why you wrote it through that lens.
Yeah, when my wife and I were exploring our relationship dynamics, like when we broke up and then got back together, we were like, man, we in relationship 1.0, what we call that, we were two people who were really, in our experience, although not aware enough, but self aware and really curious about our relationship excuse me, really curious about our relationship patterns, really curious about how do we support one another? How do we move through this? We had two people who were pretty obsessed with understanding relationships, curious, open, all the kind of things, but yet get we couldn't make it work. And we saw all the best teachers. And when we came back together after our time apart, my wife was like, "Wow, there's we worked through something that had not been worked through in the models of what we've read or seen or known." And imagine if we could put together what is the sort of relational knowledge that you need to have? The basic, like, logistical skill set stuff, like attachment, understanding the nervous system, understanding your relationship blueprints, so, like, what shapes you relationally, how humans operate just psychologically in relationship, that we all need safety, we all need security, and we're always looking for that, and we also really need to be self-expressed. We need to share who we truly are, and if who we truly are threatens our safety and security in relationship, we will get rid of who we truly are. And so what masks do we put on to carry in relationship? What do those look like? What might it sound like? What would a regular person's behavior be? How could we put that into words or a framework, which I think is so helpful because what people start to recognize when their behavior patterns are just patterns and adaptive strategies like ways to survive and create safety. Because even the most toxic relationship behaviors are really in the effort to try to create predictability, safety, security, even though and avoid suffering, even though they often just further suffering and maybe even have us repeating suffering and living in suffering, is that you separate who you are from your patterns. So you can change patterns and behaviors. And if you change those things, you'll change your life. There's no doubt. And so the writing of the book was really from this lens that really all of us are abandoning who we truly are to be in relationship till we're not. Because most of us, and I would argue almost all of us, did not get that modeling from our parents, and we certainly don't get that modeling from our society. And so we define codependency in the book as any relational dynamic where we create or maintain safety or security at the cost of ourselves, our self-expression, our well-being. And where traditionally codependency was really language and seminal work by Melody Beattie on the book Codependent No More, fantastic book, really written from the lens, as you were alluding to, of a relationship of an enabler with an addict. And we just saw that these behaviors went so much further than just a relationship dynamic with an addict. People are self-abandoning all the time, and you have usually this one person who's, like, trying to fix things, doing all the stuff, and this other person who's, "Ah, I'm broken, I need to be fixed, I'm the" and we know that traditionally with the addict, that's, "I've got the addiction, I love heroin," or whatever it is, and the other person is going, "Please stop loving heroin, just love me enough, love us enough." And we just saw that dynamic actually goes way beyond that. And how do we use our relationships and the material and the friction and the frustrations? How do we use that as actually a way to cultivate more liberation, more self-expression, more mutual positive regard? And one thing that I noticed in my work early on, years and years ago, is there was not like what I was desperately seeking when I reached a relationship rock bottom that led me to start to study relationships was I felt no one was telling the truth about relationships. No one was saying they're actually really hard. And a lot of people end up divorced. I grew up Catholic and they just say, get married and you'll stay together forever and you'll be totally in love. And I was like, I remember when my engagement ended when I was 27, I was like, man, there's a lot of people divorced around me. And then there's also a lot of people who are together who don't like each other. That didn't make sense to me. So when I started studying relationship, I didn't know that it would bring me to a place, but it did very shortly where I was like, why is no one saying any of this? Like, why is no one just being like, that's bullshit? And so I started to say, that's bullshit. And I started to just call it out. And so one of the main parts of our book and parts of what we mean by liberated love is that there is a fierce dedication to the truth above everything. And for me, that's so correlated to integrity. I think that's correlated to integrity for everybody. But I think from a societal perspective, that is a micro behavior within interpersonal relationships. But that's actually what makes thriving cultures, communities, families, and ideally democracies. But that's a whole other podcast episode, probably.
No, it is. No,
Yeah.
it's interesting because I think so many of us, we are stuck in the matrix and we get stuck in the patterns, not only of who we are as individuals, but also the work pattern, the way that we love other people. And so it gets really hard for anyone to be able to wake up and have access to that information of just how much
Yeah.
agency they actually have over their lives and their experience and creating and co-creating with other people that I'm so stuck in living somebody else's life that I can't even think about living my own life. Like, why would I do that? I'm still living for my parents and to give them everything that they were never able to do in their own lives so that they can be happy with who I am. And then if they're happy with who I am, that tells me everything that I need to know about me as an individual. And then around 30 or 40, you wake up and you're just like, who am I? Where am I
Right.
going? What am I doing? Why am I doing this? I don't even like this. And then you find
Right.
yourself and it's not until so you and I are very lucky that we were able to separate from a career path and then go down this path of knowledge, right? This knowing of gaining access to all of this information and just like taking it in for me quite obsessively, where I only listen
Same.
to podcasts 24/7 on YouTube all the time, not really watching any TV, if at all, because I'm taking down all of these audibles and trying to gain
Downloading.
access to all this.
Yeah.
Yeah, just like obsessively. I don't tell people to do that. Please don't do that. It's not healthy. It's not good for you. You will burn yourself out, but it's
It's
the
like
way
the
that
Matrix, though. It's
yeah, you're so
uploads,
hungry.
jujitsu.
That's exactly what it's like. And then you get to this place where it's now I have to share this and I have to get this out there because if I can get one person to make some sort of improvement in their life to where they become just even slightly self-aware, they get curious enough because I created something to ask me a question and then I can direct them toward a book or a video, or they sign up for a one-on-one or whatever that looks like for them, or they finally make that phone call to see a therapist. That's what it's all about. So people
Right.
get really hung up on change. I have to change people. I have to fix them. I have to get them to do something different. anxious attacher vibes, right? I need to get you to be
Yeah.
different for me to like you, all the other stuff. And it's but you don't realize that, and I'll say this under for the anxious attacher, you actually have a massive superpower in that you're already in contact with your empathy. And so
Mhm.
with having access to that, it's like it's really not that far of a trip for you to get to a place of having a more secure attachment to showing others what is possible for them just by you being more of you in that process and setting those boundaries and allowing yourself to be yourself and saying no and understanding your no no and your know, your knowledge, your
Yeah.
intuition, tapping into all of that and allowing other people to see that. So for all the anxious attachers out there, if you can hop on board that train, there's so many wonderful things and opportunities that are going to come available to you. You just can't see it right now because you're not there yet.
Yeah, amen to that, all of that, which there is literally not another skill set that will completely transform your life than understanding how to be good at relationship.
Right.
There is no other more potent vehicle for transformation. And here's the thing. If you learn how to become a good communicator, stand in yourself, learn who you are, what you value, what you need, what you want, and you really go double down onto developing a self, which really means stepping into adulthood, which really means the maturation process that a lot of us didn't experience because we didn't have attuned present parents, or we didn't have a society that, especially for men, walked them through that initiation. There's an inherent initiation that happens for women, which is when they start to menstruate. And that's that transition into being able to be a mother, which doesn't mean they maybe have from a maturity perspective can do that yet, but there's at least a delineation. For us, there's not a delineation. It used to be that you went for some tribes, went out into the forest and saw if you came back, you made it. You're a man. But there's a tribe, I know Francis Weller talks about it, where they paint the children black and they're to be ignored throughout the village. They're not to be spoken to or acknowledged. And then when they enter ceremony, who they were before that moment is dead, and they're given a new name, and now they're responsible for the village. And that initiation is something innately that we all need. And now I would argue when you're waking up at 30, 40, 20, 50, 60, doesn't matter the age, where all of a sudden you're like, why did I create this? Who am I? And Francis Weller talks about when you enter an initiation, and this is from that sort of Jungian side of therapy of psychology, which is that an initiation has 3 characteristics. The first one is the world you once knew no longer exists. The second one is who you are in the world no longer makes sense, and the world no longer makes sense. And the third one is you can't go back to the way things were. Now, a lot of us end up suspended in that. We end up in that space where we don't actually walk fully through. We don't trust the new world, and we aren't ready to fully let go of the old one. And so this stepping into like a fully embodied version of ourselves is so liberating to everyone we're in relationship with. Even if I was to have a hard conversation with someone who maybe I've never had hard conversations with, and that causes a disruption in our relationship is now being offered the invitation to become a relationship that has hard conversations. Now, if I'm the one who showed up to that and the other person decides not to, that's not a failure of my self expression. That's that the relationship itself couldn't hold the more mature version of both of us. And that's because perhaps the other person didn't want to step into that role. And that's okay. But when we enter a mature space of relating, we actually start to recognize that it's okay. It's okay that they couldn't come along. It's okay that they couldn't hold my totality. It's not a failure of me or the relationship. It just is. And if you learn how to relate that way, your whole life changes because if you learn how to honor yourself and your boundaries and your needs and what a nourishing connection feels like, you're not going to eat processed shit ever anymore because processed relationships are the wearing masks. Processed food just feels different in your body. And you start to notice your addictions because your addictions, things like all of a sudden you're like, man, I don't know if I should drink anymore. Or man, I think I should quit sugar. Like you start to realize that you don't have any more dissonance to numb. You don't have, because what ultimately feeds addiction, there's that statement from Gabor Mates here where he says the wrong question is why the addiction, the right question is why the pain. And I would argue that the pain that feeds addiction is the pain of self-abandonment and misalignment with our actual values. When you are violating your own morality, which you might not even know what that is, but if you have an addiction, you're likely doing that. And if you're experiencing anxiety or depression, you're likely violating a boundary, a value of yourself, and a value that you hold innately. And so if your choices and behaviors are in violation of that, you're going to be anxious. You're going to be depressed because you don't have access to choice. You don't perceivably have access to choice. Of course, you do. You just don't think you do. And that's a result of likely trauma, likely lots of stuff. And again, all that stuff can be good reasons why. But at the end of the day, ain't nobody coming to save us. No one's coming to heal my trauma for me. Although I've certainly had in my younger years some women invite me to do that. "Hey, do you wanna look at some of your stuff?" "Nah,
Nah, good.
I'll have a beer." Yeah.
And
I'll
isn't
find a
that
woman who has less standards.
yeah, isn't that how that works? We're so trained to cope. And at a very early age, you're trained to self abandon. Your needs don't necessarily matter. Your thoughts don't necessarily matter. Your expression of self doesn't really matter. We come into the world with so much joy and happiness, peace, and love. And then we're very quickly conditioned to the external world. And you find yourself at 5, 6, 7 years old with your joy completely sucked out of you, and you don't tap into that again until much later in life. And that's a conversation I've had with Dr. Mary Catherine McDonald. She wrote the book Unbroken: The Trauma Response Is Never Wrong.
Mhm.
And she discusses tiny little joys. And it was one of those things I had to reconnect with that. I didn't have it. When you don't see people that can experience joy in the mundane, and then you sit there and you're in this place of just chronically anxious for
Yeah.
appears to be no reason. You sit there and you're like, "What is going on? Why does this exist? Where is this coming from?" And there's this shame and guilt, and then you just go, "Ah, that's carried shame. That's not actually mine. That
Mm.
actually belonged to somebody else." And then on top of that, I grew into a human being that was carrying something else that didn't belong to me, but I thought that it did, so I continued to down that same path and
Right.
compounded on top of that over long periods of time, and you completely destroy yourself when you finally do wake up and hit that dark night of a soul where you're just completely shredded from the inside out, and you're like, you've got a couple choices. One of those choices was to leave the planet permanently. For me, it was,
Mm.
"Okay, I'm not gonna do that."
Right.
It's a split decision. You're like, I'll stick around. I don't know how, but I'll figure this out. And then that's when it switched into, now I'm going to dive into audibles and books and all this YouTube and just get obsessive about learning and growing and expanding, developing, evolving. And so for people who are listening to this and you think that you can't tap into a different way of being, you absolutely can. But we think that we're stuck because everybody always tells you who you are to them. And at some point, you have to stop and zoom out, step back, and pay a little bit more attention to what do they have of you inside of their head. It's very limited moments over a long period of time, couple minutes here, a couple minutes there, and then they have a file in the back of their brain that says, "This is who Jason is. This is who Mark is, and I know what you're capable of, Mark. I know what you can do. So when you do anything that deviates outside of this box that I placed you in the back of my brain, I'm gonna tell you that you can't do that. You're not capable. That's
Right.
not something that can happen, and I'm gonna place limits over top of you." And we do that in our relationships all the time. I know what you're capable of, and then when somebody goes outside of that, it creates this dissonance, and what they're really doing is showing you what you're capable of, and you just don't recognize that you're also capable of that. And I try to give people a little bit of hope. When people do that, they do go away for a period of time, and then might take a year, might take a couple years, might take a decade, but eventually people do come back and they want to have how did you do what you did? How did you get to this place where you are now? I had a conversation with somebody close to me recently and they're just like, I really admire how far you've come and the things that you've done. I didn't think that I could do that. And they still think that they can't do it, but they see the changes in me and they're just like, that is amazing. I wish I could do that.
It's so profound, like, you don't realize how much of a healing force it is to heal oneself. Like, I
Starts with
always
you.
think about that. Yeah, I always think, like, the greatest act of revolution is to find your own voice, because when you do that and you use it, you inspire other people to use theirs. Like, ultimately, like, all acts of revolution happen because one person stands up, and then that gives confidence to a second and then a third. But without the first person or the second person, what the other people are doing is doing a mathematical equation of measuring their social risk. So if more people speak up about something, then it's more likely the people who are less confident to do that start to speak up as more people speak up. So everything is momentum for transformation. So if everyone starts to, if one person steps into their potential, 100% another person is ready for that frequency, that invitation, that possibility, that potential, because it's being represented by someone else. So you doing what you've done, me continuing to do what I'm doing, I see it like, I see it like if any animal, like if a bee doesn't do what a bee does, we die. And if any animal doesn't do what it does, although I'd argue maybe a mosquito would be good to get rid of, but likely even them, everybody dies. And what's really fascinating, the only thing that I think is not true about that is if humans died, other animals would thrive, which is fascinating to think about. But if you don't fully step into your potential of your soul and your being and why you're here, then are you letting down the oneness? Are you letting down the collective? Are you letting down? And I actually think of it at that level of integrity, because when you put it at that level, you find a different force of change. One of the most powerful things I was ever told before I started was I was afraid. And I remember telling this person that, and he said to me, "How arrogant of you to believe that your gifts are for you. They're not for you. They're for the people who need it. And for every day that you don't start, you don't support them." And I just needed that, because it was like, I had so many fucking excuses to not begin. I didn't have the right camera. I didn't have the, and that was before you could just turn on an iPhone and have 4K. At least I had some validity to my argument, but not. It was like, now I just see how there's a calling within us that says, come on, say the thing, do the thing, have the conversation. And that's where addictions are. We're monetizable when we're disconnected from ourselves. We're capturable. That's why claiming your attention in the face of literally products that their whole purpose is to steal your attention. Like, their whole purpose is to actually make you not become everything. Then you can actually see when you go down the rabbit hole on your smart device and all of a sudden you're like, I'm just going to check something. And then 45 minutes later, you're down some sort of TikTok endless pit.
Don't judge me.
You like, you're doing exactly what it's designed to do.
Yeah.
But you're allowing that system that operates and profits off your disconnection from yourself, you're allowing it to win. And when we actually say yes to whatever it is, which it just takes one first, okay, I'm done doing what I'm doing. I accept that my mission, at least as I know it now, is because confusion is just fear. Confusion is freeze. And so we present as I don't know, but really we just maybe are actually needing to learn how to become the authority over our own lives and our own direction and who we are. And I'd say in a society and a culture that wants you to assimilate, the act of individuating is also, that's the revolution right there. Like finding your voice, expressing yourself, which doesn't mean an absence of empathy and collectivism. It's just like everything that is toxic in its extremes. Collectivism is incredibly toxic in its extremes. And individualism is incredibly toxic in its extremes. And like our book talks about, is like, how do you be you and be in a relationship that honors the fullest self expression of the other person, not one at the cost of the other, that together we rise, you know?
That's why I talk so much about co-creation and using the language of a shared mission and vision.
Mm,
If you can get to that place, if you both can create, become fully self-actualized as the individual that you are, but also in the context of the relationship, then you can truly create anything that you desire. I loved what you said earlier with done doing what I'm doing. That's surrender. and you're surrendering to the past of who you've known yourself to have been and all these different experiences. And you're saying that I can no longer take this path. I'm done and I'm ready to walk a different path. And that is such a freeing and scary moment at the same time. I still go through it because I've created something here. I have something. It hasn't fully actualized into what it could potentially be. With this episode, I'll hit 100,000 downloads finally, and
That's amazing.
it's taken me about a year and a half to be able to do that. Where this will be the 85th episode, and it's cool. But 2 years ago, I was a police officer
Isn't that wild?
working crime scene, SWAT team. Served on a special unit for a little bit, and that was my job. That was my role. That was my mission. That was my vision. That's who I was to my core. That was the job that I was doing. That's how I saw myself in the world. Doing all of this wasn't on my bingo card, but as I started to self-educate, and then I got my bachelor's degree late in life, I got a master's degree in threat response management late in life, and all of these things started to come together, and you come into this knowing and being on the job and seeing the things that I saw and having the experiences that I did, you begin to recognize and identify, I've experienced that. I've gone through that. And if that's trauma, then I have trauma. And if I have, and you're trying to make sense of these things in real time, and you begin to see yourself a little bit differently through that process. And then through crime scene, people leave the planet permanently, and the decisions behind that
Mm,
and the scenes that are set from that entire experience. Again, you got to compartmentalize that and pack it away in the back of your brain. And you got to do something with that information at some point down the road, which we talked about a little bit earlier. We just go right into coping mechanisms because that's a little bit
right.
easier than actually working through that stuff. But that's what's informed everything that I'm doing here and what I've been able to present to the world. But I'm in that place where I still stop myself because I'm afraid of allowing myself to fully become in this arena because I'm still hooked into that old world, but haven't fully left it behind. But it doesn't exist anymore. I can't go back there. I can't do that. So moving forward, this is who I am. And so it's tapping into that new identity and allowing myself to be that person.
Mm,
Surrender.
surrender. That
Yeah.
moment where you stop the momentum against, right? Like you stop pushing against what's trying to move through you. That's a big moment. I can't, we often get to that moment not by choice. Surrender is a rock bottom. Surrender is, but once you hit that moment where you realize that you can put down all the things you've been carrying, as you alluded to earlier, too, that a lot of what we carry isn't even ours.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden we're like, holy shit, like you can't, you get buried under it.
Yeah.
And then what's ironic too is you then emerge and then you realize you're actually carrying more. You're still carrying more. And I think that's actually the journey that really partnership allows, but friendship allows, men's groups allow, women's groups allow, is that there's like a continued witnessing of you below, like where you still carry mass, where you, like truly good friends still they offer that window into self that we don't see ourselves. They can see the weight of something we're carrying that maybe we don't want to acknowledge. And so when they present it to us, we now can't pretend we don't see it. And then it's up to us to choose to put it down or not. And I think about that as this continued act of revelation, that it's both revealed and revelatory. And there's a yeah, I think it's just all such a sacred act. There's something so beautiful about it, but there's also something so painful. It reminds me of that quote. It's something like how hard it is to love what death can touch. And you think about it as like in all acts of liberation is death. And I think this is partially to do like our fear of actually letting go of things is because we don't acknowledge our own mortality. And if you can be with the big D death, you can be with the little d death, the deaths of self, the death of belief, the death of identity. Think about the transition you went from. Same for me. I was a pharmaceutical rep. I could say to someone, this is what I do. And all of a sudden there was all the preconceived notions, which I liked having. I liked all the things that came with being a rep back then. And now I don't know that I would. But I remember crying after I left that job because I was just like, "Who am I? Oh, I'm me, but who am I?" You know? And also realizing how easy that identity can be formed when it's correlated to security again. I think, like,
Uh-huh.
in creating social media and having a social media platform that does well, then it's easy to be the guy who talks about love. There's nothing conflicting about that. There's not really anything challenging about that. It's still it can be safe. And I also recognize like how anything when you build a business in another business, that's a pretty bad decision. I now know. So no, don't build your business on another business. Use the other business as a way to build your business. There's a saying about building and becoming, getting a significant social media following that you're building a mansion in someone else's backyard. And so there's when you do that, you're still not free. You're not free because now, even though it was sold as this idea that you would leave at 9 to 5, you're now, as I said earlier, you're in a 24/7. And this is why love and money are so correlated because they're both connected to security. So our patterns with money are often very similar to our patterns with love.
It's interesting because I was a chef for, God, 15 years prior
To being in SWAT.
to being a police officer. Yeah, 2008
That's
hit, and
natural I would have said. Normally people are chef, then SWAT,
yeah.
then
Normal
relationship
progression, man.
master.
Yeah.
Yes.
What you get from each of those experiences, and everybody always said, "How can you go from hospitality into law enforcement?"
That's
And
so true.
it's all understanding the human condition, human
Right.
behavior, human experiences. Food is what binds us, it brings us together in
Mhm.
community. We learn to express ourselves through the artistry of culinary arts, and the law enforcement portion allowed me to grow up in a lot of different ways that I didn't receive when I was younger, and so I was very immature in my process, and through going through all of that, going back to school, getting my bachelor's degree, becoming a police officer, growing inside of that container, it was just amazing to then be here and take all of that knowledge and experience and then pour that into a different type of container where I get to your mess is your message, right? So I get to take all of this stuff now and hopefully it impacts people. It helps you. It helps guide you. It teaches you something. You gain a little bit of information with every take a walk with me that you go on that ends up helping you. Now, there are a couple
Mm.
things if I don't ask you, people are going to be really mad. And we already know the answer to this, but will my ex come back?
That's such a that's such a classic question.
It is. But
Um,
it leads us into the sacred pause and a closing ceremony.
the first thing I'll say is the wrong question is, will my ex come back? Because that's still focused on their behavior. You wanna get to a place where it doesn't matter, and I know that can feel like a giant leap because from that question to say get to a place where it doesn't matter is not that's not a linear path. It doesn't feel linear, but it is, in that when a relationship is over, which that question indicates that the relationship is over there next, you have to connect to the deep truth that it's over. Without that, like I had someone the other day say to me that they were in a sacred pause with their ex. And I was like, so you guys in your relationship dissolved it for a period of time and you're going to come back together at the end of that. No, I told him I wasn't going to tolerate his ambivalence anymore and that I was going to go no contact and go into my own container of self. And that when I emerge after this date, he can contact me. I'm like, that's not a sacred pause. That's a sacred pause for you, but that's a breakup followed by a desire to dive deep into yourself and have boundaries so that you could do that. I was like, but are you hopeful that he's going to contact you on the day that your boundary ends? And she said, yeah, exactly. And I said, you might right now, because you're even asking this question while you're in this period, your focus is still on him. Focus is on him at the end of this time, which is meant to be a focus on you. And it's important that the question comes forward so it can bring forward that the orientation is still about the other person. And this is an ambivalent person, a person who, when they were together, couldn't even fully choose them. And so the same thing is occurring. They're still living in the fantasy that they're finally going to change their mind. And I said, till you actually recognize one, that it's not a pause, it's ended. Has it ended? Yeah, it's ended. So your relationship's over. Yes, it's over. So right now, as far as we know, you're not getting back together. That's right. Would you get back together with him the way he was when you were together? No. Okay. So What you wanna do is you wanna live your life as if it's over, because it is. So you might ask yourself, "What am I not doing because I'm thinking they might come back?" Because that also robs the person of the experience of healing that is actually required, because when this person was saying, "He might come back," and then I think, "Will I get back together with him?" And then I also think about this other guy or idea, an archetype of a partner
Yeah.
that I would like. And I said, "Make them the same thing." Every time you think about him, think about the archetype and watch his face wash away in the archetype that you imagine. Because when you're focused on showing up right now to make sure you're a match for that guy, it won't be you ruminating about an ex. That's not a match. And I said, but if you want to be able to meet this person and get excited about that, if you meet him, you won't give a shit if he looks like your ex or not, because you'll be so excited about being so doubled down on your rituals, your habits, your values. And she still had about a month. She took a 3-month pause for herself, and she still had about a month left. And I said to her, "You're asking from month 2 about the end of month 3." I said, "But at the end of month 3, you already know what to do. So you're only seeing the end of this 12 weeks from the lens of you at 8 weeks. If you double down on who you are, by 12 weeks, you won't give a shit." And that's the place we hope to get to, but that's what time-bound containers do. When someone leaves a commitment or a boundary early, they violate their own agreements with themselves. So they can't even trust the person they leave the commitment for. So maybe I should give more context on what a pause is. So my wife and I, in our book, we talk about the context of a sacred pause. And when we broke up, we didn't actually intentionally go into a pause, but that's what we did. And you get to call it a pause if you get back together. But in real time, it's not a pause while you're
And
going through it.
you had been together for 4 years prior
Yeah.
to that, right?
Yeah, we've been together 4 years, and look, we tried everything. So the
Yeah.
only alternative was to end the relationship and trust what was coming forward for my wife, and also trust, or for, at that time, my girlfriend, and trust what was coming forward for me, which was I had no interest in trying to get someone to choose a relationship fully anymore. It took me 40 something years, but I finally got to a place where I honestly, it was like, it was so done for me. I was like, I have no interest in keeping this. We tried for a long period of time to understand how to move through it. And we realized that moving through it meant ending it. But in the time we were apart, we both did really deep personal work. And so we called that a sacred pause. But I've worked with now in totality, thousands in interpersonal coaching relationships with groups and such, hundreds. And I, they have taken these pauses from dating, like for 3 months, where they don't date, they don't interact, they just focus on themselves. And what I notice, inevitably, what always happens is about a month. Let's say they make a 3-month agreement, which is the minimum. About a month before their agreement's over, always the, like, perfect test comes along. Like, the most dreamy reason to leave your commitment to yourself, which is when you know it's coming, at least you can laugh at the universe, because it's like, I remember when I took the sacred pause years and years ago before I met my wife, and I didn't know I was doing that, but I just didn't date, didn't interact. And I remember I was at a bar with some friends, and the waitress was really attractive, and she was like, "I never do this, but I would love to give you my number while you're in town. I'd love to see you." And I was like, "This never has ever happened to me in my entire life." And I had to honor my commitment, which was, "No, I can't. I'm committed to this." And younger version of myself would have been like, "Yeah, let's go. Sounds great." But I knew that honoring that, I knew it was a test. I knew it
Yeah.
was a test because it was the best test I ever experienced. And if you knew how to test me, it was a great way to test me. But I say all that because when you have context to that's going to happen. Because if you're not dating and you're in your container and someone says, "Hey," you're like, "Hey, I've been doing this thing for 3 months. Really nice to meet you, but I'm actually not available for any communication or connection till this date. Why don't I get your number and I'll return to you at that time?" If the person says, "Oh, let's just go on a date. Let's just have a coffee." Like, it won't be about anything. Red flag.
Yeah. I just
Because
told you what I wanted.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. And what happens is a lot of people leave their commitment for this type of person, for this test. And what they realize is one, they can't trust themselves because they broke their commitment to themselves for this person. And what they're seeing, which getting back to the definition of codependency, is they are leaving their own selves, their own needs, wants, all that kind of stuff to maintain relationship. They're operating from scarcity. If I don't say yes to this, at the cost of myself, I will miss out. And it is that very fear of being all of me and standing in what I desire and then tolerating, lowering a standard to accommodate that actually is the cause of so much relational dysfunction.
And resent.
So much resentment. Yeah. You get to blame them for being the hot test, but really
Mhm.
it's you're the hot mess. I never thought of that, but that actually goes well together.
Oh, that's good. I think we covered everything, man.
We've resolved it all.
No, we could do 20 more podcasts on a lot of different things, but I have 3 pages of questions. So, Mark, thank you for being on the Blueprint Podcast. Tell everybody how to reach you and how to get Liberated Love.
Thank you for having me. And if you've listened to the totality of this, I'm so grateful because I know you're exchanging time for this. And that's the one thing you can't get back, or we haven't figured out how to. You can find me on all the, except for Instagram. I do have Mark Groves podcast on the Instagram now. My producer runs it. And then my podcast, the Mark Groves podcast, and then have all my relationship courses at createthelove.com and have a membership where we take people on the journey into relationship mastery, moving through breakups, mastery of dating, all that kind of stuff. Each course is available in there. And yeah, it's a fun place. I like having a community because it's no longer curated by a broker.
I agree.
So it feels nice. But yeah, so thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate it.
For sure. And everybody who's listening, be sure to check the show notes where I'll have all the links for everything so you can connect with Mark.
Oh yeah, and the book you can get anywhere books are sold, and the audiobook has special conversations at the end of each chapter from my wife and I.
And I love that you guys did that. It's so you get all of this information and it's just very easy to digest. It's very easy to listen to. I'm an audible person.
Same.
And then I was very surprised at the end of each chapter to hear you guys riffing and talking about just your experiences. And it made it feel so much more personal going through
Oh,
it
sweet.
that way. And it just sticks with you and it makes it a lot easier to take notes because then you're just like, oh yeah, we're connecting the dots as we go along. So it was very cool that you
Right.
guys did that.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. And yeah, thanks to everyone for listening.